If there's one thing I've been getting asked a ton about recently, it is about armor stats. As we know, armor stats got a really big revision in Edge of Fate to the point where most armor that's dropping now is actually pretty viable in a lot of different builds. But this can be very overwhelming for a lot of people, especially since for the past 3 or 4 years, armor has not really mattered that much in the grand scheme of the game in terms of the loot chase. Not only that, but most builds prior to Edge of Fate could have been spec'd with the exact same gear in the exact same way. So there was never any real creativity in build crafting when it came to stats. Now, there is. The most common question I get asked when it comes to stats is, what stats should I get now? And there is no answer to this question like there used to be in the past, because it depends on your build. The best stats don't really exist anymore because your build will determine what stats are best for that build. For example, if you're running an Ashen Wake Titan build, you're going to want a lot of grenade stat, which is found on Grenadier or Gunner armor. If you're running an Electric Slide Warlock, which we'll make an example of in this video, then you're going to want a lot of melee stat, which is found on Brawler or Paragon armor. Ascension Grapple Hunter, you probably want high grenade with as much extra melee as you can get. It all just depends on the build that you are going for. I usually try to outline what stats I recommend going for in my build videos, and from there you can search your inventory and try to match as best as you can. However, there is some nuance there. It is not as simple as just grabbing all Grenadier armor for your grenade build and calling it a day, although sometimes it actually can be. Brawler armor, for example, features health as a stat, which in PvE is considered more of a dump stat or a less desirable stat because its benefits aren't as potent as the other stats available. Health on orb pickup is very nice, but other things tend to outweigh its benefits, on top of the fact that we have access to a lot of healing in the game. In PvP, on the other hand, health's benefits are more substantial because the effects it provides have much more impact on moment-to-moment gameplay compared to other stats available. This is why Bulwark armor tends to be tossed aside in PvE, but much more valued in PvP. So, those looking for melee stat might have to deal with having a decent amount of health stat as well, or having to mod in more melee stat in the form of armor stat mods or font armor mods. Paragon armor features the melee stat, but as its secondary stat, with super being the main stat. Super is considered better than health in PvE, so for a more melee-focused setup, you might want to have some Paragon armor mixed in with Brawler, or mixed with some other third armor type that has the melee stat as its third randomly rolled stat. This technically results in less melee stat maybe for your build, but it maximizes what are considered the best stats at the moment. However, I have a build that pretty much only uses Brawler armor, my Wishful Ignorance setup, and it's working just fine. So don't feel like if you're not running the most optimized version of a build with the best stats possible, that it's not worth running at all. I know we're getting in the weeds a little bit more right now, but this is the kind of decision making you need to start getting comfortable with in this new era of build crafting. If more stat packages end up coming to the game, then you'll be able to fine tune even more, but right now we are limited to the 6 stat packages that we have. Don't forget about masterworking your gear as well. It gives 1 stat of the 3 lowest stats on a piece of armor, which are all going to be 0. This seems weird, but getting free stats, even in things that aren't important to your build, is still a really good effect. Remember that every single point of a stat contributes to your gameplay now. It is no longer chunks of 10. What's cool about this revision is that you can play a build much differently to someone else depending on what you value. If someone wants to go 200 grenade stat with their Starfire protocol setup, then they can do that. You might be more inclined to sacrifice some of your grenade stat in favor of some more super stat so that you can super more often. that's also fine. There is no right answer a lot of the time. It's just your answer based on your desires and your armor. Another question I often get is, when should I start ditching my old 2.0 gear for new 3.0 gear? And the answer to that question, I think, is a bit more clear. I think around tier 3 or tier 4 is when you should start purging old armor, with a couple of exceptions. Tier 3 armor is around equal to the best stuff that you could get prior to Edge of Fate, that 65 to 68 range of Artifice armor. Tier 3 is dropping around that range, with Tier 4 dropping even higher, pushing into the 70s. So you're essentially getting back to around the same total amount of stats you were capable of getting pre-Edge of Fate with Tier 3 armor. Not only that, but a lot of older armor tended to have a stat distribution that were desirable in the past, but aren't really as desirable now because of how stats converted over in the new system. Older armor converted into things like health and class and some kind of melee or grenade stat, and those are some of the weaker stat distributions in the game for PvE right now, most of the time. The stat packages available now can oftentimes give you very potent stat blocks that are a lot more focused, although not all of them are going to be good for your build. The main exception to me is any old armor that you farmed that has spikes of weapons and super stat, because that stat distribution is not currently available to get in the same way that like grenade and weapons is available on gunner armor, right? At the highest gear levels, like tier 5, it is possible to get large chunks of weapons and super stat on the same piece, kind of close to what you were capable of getting pre-patch. What I've been doing is hoarding lots of armor on one character. I get a nice stockpile, and then I create a bunch of builds on that character, and anything that doesn't make into a build, I get rid of it. I don't think it's that big of a deal to delete a bunch of stuff after you've made some builds, because the odds are pretty good that you will find another piece of armor if you want to make another build at some point in the future. And it's also pretty easy to just go from tier 3 to tier 4 or tier 4 to tier 5 when you find an armor piece. Do not be afraid to delete stuff, especially if you're still in the process of leveling up and pushing into tier 4 or tier 5 gear. You will get more stuff down the road, and it's not going to be a big deal to get new armor pieces. I did a video on this in 2023, so this is more of an update and or refresher to that video using Destiny Item Manager and D2 Armor Picker, updated for the current era. These are the tools that I use to filter out what armor pieces to use in a build so that I can have the best stat distribution possible based on what I'm looking for. So I'm going to switch to being like live here in a sec, and I'm going to show you guys the process that I go through when making and optimizing a build. We've only really scratched the surface of this discussion though, and I'm very open to having more talks as time goes on. Hi, I'm the guy that was just talking. We're here in Destiny 2 Armor Picker, and this is really the main thing that I use in order to make a build. We also have Destiny Item Manager's loadout optimizer tool, which we will also look at. I'll show you how to make a build in that. But this is just what I've been using a lot of the time. So I kind of wanted to just give a quick run through of how I use this tool in order to make my builds. So first things first, we're making a Warlock build. So just click whatever character you want, and then let's move on. Your stat distribution, we're going to come back to this last because we have a bunch of other settings that we want to lock in first, and then we can come up here and start picking what stats we're going to be hunting down. So the first thing we need to do is pick your exotic armor piece that you're going to be using in the build. If you're not using one for whatever reason, you would just click the empty box and you would just not have an exotic. We are going to be going with a Fellwinter's variation of this build. The other variation uses an exotic class item that I don't have right now, so we're just going to do the Fellwinter version. And so we just click on Fellwinter, and so now our helm slot will have only Fellwinter, and that's it, Fellwinter's helm. Something that I would encourage people to do is make sure you turn off this include legacy legendary armor option. For exotics, you know, a lot of you are probably going to still have older exotics. That is totally fine. I do think you should eventually replace them, especially if Bungie ever buffs up how many stats they can actually have on them, because right now they're tuned to around a tier 2 level of stats, which is kind of weak. But if you don't have this selected and you pick an exotic that you don't have a new copy of, you are going to see this. no results found. So just like make sure that you have this checked if you only have old armor. And if you also want to force the game to only use new armor or featured armor, you have these two tabs up here to make sure that like, hey, you're only using the new stuff for your new gear bonus, or maybe you're putting together an avant-garde type setup. That will force you along that path. Otherwise, try to leave this unchecked as much as you can, especially as you increase in tiers. Next, we have the set bonuses that you can choose to have on your gear. For this particular one, I am choosing to have the 2-piece tech sec bonus just to, have some kind of an example. Although I am running with Bastion in this particular setup, so I just thought it would be neat to have this bonus. But you'll only be able to select the set bonuses that you actually have the armor for. Like, I can't turn on Ion Adapter or Aeon Adapter or Aeon Renewal because I don't have 2 pieces of that armor to even use in a build in the first place. So it's only going to give you what you have available. And you can pick 2-piece. We have 4-piece capabilities. Obviously, that's going to limit your armor because you can only have, in this case, Fellwinter's Helm and 4 other pieces of tech sec. But it is a great way to like make sure like, oh, I really want the set bonus, so I have to lock it in here. Because if you don't, then you might pick a build that doesn't have that set bonus. Next, we have our stat boost, which is coming from our fragments. So normally when you come up with a build, you'll be like, okay, I'm going to run this aspect, and then here's probably the fragments that I'm going to run. So if you already know ahead of time what fragments you are going to run with your build, which is going to just vary depending, let's get a little more light on my face, which is just going to depend on like whatever variation you want to run. If you know what you're going to run, then you can pick the fragments here because some fragments have stat bonuses, right? And you will get a much clearer picture of what your stat bonuses are going to look like if you know them ahead of time. Not every single fragment has some kind of a stat bonus or a stat negative. So those that don't are not listed here. We're just running with another kind of example here where we have 5 different fragments doing stuff to our stats. Again, just as an example, although this is pretty close to like what I would normally be running in this build. Otherwise, I like to assume that all of my stuff is masterworked because I know I will eventually masterwork it. If you are low on materials, you might want to uncheck these because you're not going to regularly masterwork your stuff. But I just like to leave these on because I know that I'm eventually going to masterwork. Okay, so let's stop yapping and let's start looking at some of our stats here. This is a very melee focused setup that we're running. And so whenever I know what kind of setup we're going to be running, I like to just max out the meter and say like, okay, if we just went all the way melee, what are we looking at stat-wise? What kind of stat distributions do we have available to us? So if I was running a more weapon-oriented build, I'm like, all right, we got 181 weapons. Let me click on that, and like, what can we possibly do? And this example is like, okay, you can have a lot of grenade, you can have a lot of weapon, and that's really about it, right? So we're gonna max this out. Let's go like 140. I like to go on like nice round numbers. Like, it doesn't really matter, but I just like the round numbers. So I'll click on that, and we can also organize by total stats, which we'll get to in a second here. And even just looking at like some of these setups here, like 142 melee, 98 grenade is pretty good. Remember, going up to 100 of a stat is like the most amount of regeneration capabilities that you can get. Anything over 100 is usually going to give you some kind of other effect. For grenade specifically, anything over 100 is going to get you more damage on that grenade, but I'm running a cold snap grenade. The whole point is not really damage, so I want to get maybe as close to 100 as possible for that maximum regeneration, but anything over 100 is kind of going to be a waste. So like, I really wouldn't want this 110 because that 10 extra grenade stat is not really going to be contributing to my build in a way that I care about, right? So 98 grenades pretty good. 85 supers, pretty fantastic. 69 weapons, not too bad either. I wouldn't mind even potentially trading some of this grenade over to class. We don't have the ability to, but that might be something that I look out for going into the future. Like, hey, if I'm looking for a certain kind of armor piece, maybe something that has that 3rd stat as class might be a little bit better because I want a little more class. I can live without as much grenade energy because I'm going to be running Feed the Void in this build, and Feed the Void gives you Devour, and Devour gives you lots of grenade energy, so I don't need as much grenade energy there. So if you even wanted to just do something like this and a stat distribution looks good here, we got 489 total stats, which is among the higher total stats that I can do across most of my builds. I can just click here, be like, let's take a look. Okay, we got 2-piece tech set, like I asked. We even have 2-piece lustrous. I'm running with a solar SMG right now, so this bonus is actually going to be pretty nice too because it's related to solar weapons. Maybe if I want to do like, hey, let's do Bushido as well to get final blows with freshly drawn or reloaded weapons healing me, that could also be on the list, right? If I wanted 2-piece set bonuses. So we could just immediately go with this. But I usually like to fine tune a little bit more. I like to see what else is potentially available. So like, okay, let's go down to like 130 melee. Like what else do we have available? And we can kind of compare that. We can list our total stats here. We're up to 491, so we can eke out an extra, 2 stats. When you're playing around with like somewhere in the 10 stat range, like going from like a 491 to a 483, like I think somewhere in that range is okay. Which does remind me, by the way, I've gotten the question of like, oh, when should I go for maximum stats over getting some sort of a set bonus? And I think that's a bit of a tougher call to make just on the fly. Like, I don't think you should say like, 30 of us, you should give up 30 of a stat in order to get a set bonus. That's like the right proportion. Like, I don't think there's a right answer there. It really just depends on how badly you want some kind of a set bonus and how much you can get that set bonus and maximize your, like, because ideally you want the set bonus and you're maximizing your stats as much as possible, right? So it just kind of depends. Like some set bonuses are not really that great, or they don't work with your build, or you're not going to use them. So it's obviously not worth sacrificing those stats in order to get that. But the stronger something is, or the better something is going to be in that build, the more I think you can sacrifice some amount of stats in order to get that set bonus. But there's not like a specific, like, yep, give up 25 of a stat and then grab the set bonus. That's the trade-off. That's the number. That doesn't exist to me. So what else So we got the 130 stats, or the 130 melee. Is there anything else that like is really super enticing for me right now compared to like the 140 version? Not particularly. I actually quite like this 142, this top option right here. I think it's pretty good. So if I want to click down, looking at the 130s, we actually have quite a lot of options. We talked about how I feel about grenade stat in this build. So like, I don't really want to go above 100 grenades. So I can maybe set like, hey, grenade maximum is at, clear that. I think there's a way to, I think it's in Destiny Item Manager, which we'll take a look at in a second. I'm not sure there's a way to set like a cap on a stat in here. But you can just kind of organize it by like, hey, give me what's like some of the lowest grenade values that you can give me, and you can kind of go off of that. So like, I don't really want that much grenade. 83 is pretty good, but I'm more than willing to trade some of that grenade stat for other stats. And look, we have something that's a little bit better. We got 65 class stat, 71 class stat. Then it's like, okay, well, do I want the 69 weapon stat or the 59 weapon stat? And then, oh my, look at how much super we're getting with this. This one has 96 super. So it just depends on what things you want to value. I think this set looks pretty good. This stat distribution here, class at 71 gets us back to where we were pre-Edge of Fate. Weapons at 59 is not too bad. Super at 96 is fantastic. I really want to have my super quite a lot in this setup. And then grenade is also pretty good. So like, okay, I'm pretty happy with this one. And as soon as you find a stat distribution that you're happy with, you're like, okay, this is it. This is what I want to focus on. All you got to do, open loadout in dim. There might be some connection thing that you need to do in dim to like link the two together. But if you have all that on lock, you should just be able to hit open loadout in dim, and there it is. I'll fix my screen here real quick. All right, and here it is. Right, we have our build, call it a electric slide. I think probably 2 or 3 or something at this point, and that's our build, and we can lock in our subclass stuff like what super I want to use. Needle Storm. You guys I think probably know how this stuff goes, right? I need Arcane Needle. I'm running with Lightning Surge, Feed the Void. We already have our fragments in from previously because we put them in Destiny 2 Armor Picker. And then if you really want to specialize, like, hey, I know that I'm using Bastion in this setup, so I'm going to put in Bastion right there. I know that I'm using Yeartide Apex. Let's just call it this one for now. And then my power weapon, I'm like, I don't really know what I'm going to do yet, so I just leave that one blank. We also have our mods here. I don't like to put in my mods in Destiny Item Manager. I like to do it in game, and then once I'm done in game, then I'll kind of translate it back to Destiny Item Manager to save it as a loadout. But if you really want to do your mods here, you can totally do them here. That's fine. I just like to do them in game, and then you would hit save, and then it's right. Well, here you go, right here. I already had a lecture slide too, so it just saves it right here. You would hit apply, which is behind my face cam. Of course it is. You would hit apply. It would slowly put on all the things in game, and then you can save that to a loadout in game, and you're ready to go. So let's take a look at the loadout optimizer while we're in Destiny Item Manager, kind of showing you how to do this while inside of DIM instead of D2 Armor Picker. So we're already in the loadouts tab. You're just going to hit loadouts, and then you can come over to loadout optimizer. Boom. And we're going to go through the same process, right? We have the limit to new or featured gear here as well. I would encourage you, again, try to use that. Try not to use too much old armor unless you got some really special pieces. And then we're going to do pretty much the same thing. We're going to find our exotic. It's Fellwinter's Helm. It's right behind my face cam. I'm sorry about that. Set bonuses, we're doing the same thing. I want my tech sec. We're going to select those. Mods, I like to have automatically add stat mods. I really like stat mods. If you don't want it to do that, that's totally fine. You can just turn that off. And I'm going to clear our stat priorities here. Subclass is the same thing. You're going to come down, customize your subclass, pick all of your fragments that you want to pick if you know them ahead of time, which hopefully you do. And you're just going to grab all the ones that you're going to use. If they have a stat bonus or a stat negative, it's always nice to know what that's going to be before you start building. And then from here, you're just going to use our little the little ranges right here. Right here's where you can say, like, I want minimum 50 melee, just as an example, right? In this case, I'm like, I want minimum 120 melee, and this white bar shows you like kind of the range of the stats that you can have. And so we just determined the kind of setup that we want. Like our super, we said like I want at least 80 super, and then grenade I wanted at least 70. And class, I wanted at least 60. And as you filter down and down and down and down and down, you're going to be able to see the total stat packages available to you. And so you can keep filtering this lower end or this upper end, like, melee. I'm like, yeah, 140 is the upper limit. Like, I don't want to go higher than that. Or like our super, I don't want to go higher than 100 because anything after 100, I don't really care. I want the regeneration. And so you can kind of fine tune over here to lock in what setup you want. And again, your setup is whatever you want. You can follow a build video, you can follow a guide, but at the end of the day, it is your build to tweak with as much as you want or as little as you want, right? If you just want to copy paste the YouTube build straight up and just put it right away, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think part of the fun of this is being able to specialize as much as you really want to, or as little as you want to for something like this. So I hope this little tutorial helped you guys out, a little bit of a refresher. Maybe you just weren't familiar with these tools, but again, this is how I make builds. I don't think it's really that complicated of a process. You just need to take some time, be like, okay, instead of just heading into the Caldera mines and just filling my inventory with a bunch of who knows what, let me lock in for a sec. Let me make a couple builds. I'm going to make a grenade build for when it's grenade day. I'm going to make a melee build for when it's melee day. Things like that, right? I'm going to make a stasis build for stasis day. Whatever you want to do. This is pretty much exactly how I do it. So feel free to give some of your own advice in the comments. Again, I would love to have a deeper conversation about stats and stat distributions and stat packages and how all this stuff works in the future if we have more questions. But that's what I got for you guys. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.